Welcome to the Unapologetic show, where we make a case for why Christianity still makes sense in a world of doubt. With almost apostate and now pastor and apologist, Dr. Bobby Conway, I'm your host, Tim Hall. We are continuing our series called BeliefISM we are looking at different worldviews and belief systems. And if you, the audience, has a worldview that you would like us to tackle, please let us know in the comments of this video. Bobby, this episode was kind of spawned off of an experience and an interaction that you had in Starbucks that just left you and Heather, kind of thinking a little bit. So talk to us about that interaction and what happened there.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, we were on a date night and we went over to Barnes & Noble. We like to walk around and peruse the books. And we went to the Starbucks coffee shop that is inside of Barnes & Noble. And I went up and I ordered my drink. And I noticed that the barista had they, them on their on the name badge. I was like, there, them, his. Yeah. Right. All this pronoun stuff gets so confusing for all of us, I think. But they, them, that's how this person described herself.
Right.
Clearly a female, right?
Right.
And when she took my order, she basically handed, me the receipt and said, "I'll have your order right up, sir." And I found that interesting, first off, because she had no problem calling me a sir. And why is that? Well, she, was saying what basically made sense to her, that I was a male. But why did she assume that on me? I thought to myself. Then I found myself thinking, well, we know what to say to a him or a her, to refer to them as a Mr. or a Mrs. or a sir or a ma'am. But I was curious, so I asked they, them, what does somebody say to they or them when you're trying to relate to them as an adult? Like, you just called me sir. And so she began to unpack for me different terms that can be used. Like, some people say MX, or some people say just M, like it's written out like M dot, or some people would say miss, like miscellaneous, MISC. And I was listening to her whole conversation. She said that she's been struggling with this for about 10 years. So when she was in junior high, and as I listened to her, I really appreciated the conversation that we got into. It was really friendly in nature. But Heather and I left that time thinking, what has become of our world? I mean, how did we get to this place of butchering the English language, deconstructing it in the way that we have? And this is what we're seeing take place across the spectrum of the United States, be it statutes and gender or constitutions or the family. Terms and definitions are being deconstructed. And this is influence from the postmodern culture that found its roots basically in some French thinkers in France in the 20th century.
Yeah. So again, this is prevailing in our culture, but a lot of times people don't even know what kind of the rock bottom, what the foundation is. So talk to us a little bit about why it's important, especially for those of us in the church, to understand the postmodern mindset.
It's incredibly important because it's there amongst a lot of people. So when you think about young activists, perhaps even the barista that I engaged, who seemed to be really bold about the fact that she was a they, them, passionate about it. Well, a lot of these young activists don't realize the philosophy driving their activism. They just assume their philosophy is correct, but their philosophy that is often influencing some of the youth in particular is postmodern in nature. Now, there's lots of problems with postmodern, and we'll talk about that. Like, it's not a truly livable worldview as we're seeing. But just because it's not livable doesn't mean it's not talked about or even believed by some that it's possible. And so this mindset has infiltrated its way into the church in a powerful way. And no longer does America look the way that it once did. So when we think about what's happening in our culture, this cosmic earthquake, this revolution of ideas that's taking place right now, we are in the midst of an earthquake of seismic proportions, that the shaking is the result of a philosophy known as postmodernism. And the various facets of postmodernism, its tentacles have swept across the Atlantic from the French universities and attached itself to our culture. And it has shown up on our universities. It has shown up in Hollywood. It has shown up in our politics. It has shown up everywhere. And therefore, things are changing. And the church no longer shares the values with the culture, or I should say the culture no longer shares the values of the church. It's adopting new values. And it might not even realize what's influencing it to adopt these values, but it's adopting them. And people in the church are confused, and we need to help them to think like missionaries so they know what's going on.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I do want you to, in just a second, kind of describe these three categories, pre-modern, modern, and postmodern eras. But before we do that, I just want to remind our audience that if you are doubting your Christian faith, or you know someone that's doubting your Christian faith, you are in the right place. If you want to check out this episode or any one of the other 100 unapologetic episodes, or the other 1,400 videos that we have on our YouTube channel, we would invite you to head on over to youtube.com/One Minute Apologist and subscribe, like this video, share it with your network, share it with someone that might be doubting on one of the subjects that we've covered. As I said, we're in this BeliefISM series. We've covered several different belief systems thus far. You can also catch this as an audio-only podcast on our website or on your favorite podcast player. So, Bobby, let's first help our audience by situating the discussion. Briefly explain the differences between those three categories, the pre-modern, modern, and the postmodern eras.
Well, postmodern era would be kind of the time we're living in now. But let's just kind of go back like to the pre-modern era. Obviously, that's going to precede the modern era of the 17th and 18th century, even before that, your 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century, and the 17th and 18th century. But modernism really begins to take a hold. But basically, some people will say you got the pre-modern era from about the 4th century to the 14th century. Now, obviously, before the 4th century, you're still pre-modern, but pre-modern in the sense that you're tracking from Augustine to Aquinas, who lives, in the 1300s. So what ends up happening is you see the thought in the pre-modern era, which is going to be a belief in the supernatural, a belief in God. The church is going to kind of be in, the front row at this stage. Then you get to the modern era, and people start questioning things about, are miracles possible and things like that. Humanism, the Renaissance period, and in the 17th, 18th century Enlightenment period, really became a time of challenging the pre-modern era. And that became very problematic for a number of reasons. But basically, René Descartes is considered the father of modern philosophy. And Descartes went on his own deconstruction project. You can call him maybe the original deconstructionist, right? And he sought to deconstruct everything that he knew in order to figure out what is true. And in that process of deconstructing, he came to the one thing that he knew that he could not deny, and that is that he was a thinker. And in order to think, he had to exist. So that's where you get his cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So that becomes kind of the statement, kind of really kicking off the age of enlightenment, where I think, right? It's rationalism. And so rationalism is going to be an emphasis where through our mind, we're going to rationalize everything. We're going to understand our existence. We're going to understand the sciences. We're going to understand medicine. Humanism is going to be elevated. And that became the be all end all. But then you fast forward to the father of postmodern philosophy, and you got Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche deconstructs a lot of the things that the rationalists tried to construct.
Right.
And he basically would go on and become the father figure to a lot of the later postmodern thinkers. Postmodernism as a philosophy wasn't thought out like it is today, but he's kind of the initiator of it all. And for Nietzsche and for postmodernism, though the statement isn't said, if the statement I think therefore I am becomes kind of the champion statement of the age of enlightenment and modernism, I feel therefore I am, is kind of the motto of postmodernism. So you're authentic when you live according to your feeling. I feel like a woman even though I'm a man. Well, then that's what you are. Right. And you can see that influence in our culture. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I've had people that I've engaged with that would even deny, Descartes' I think therefore I am. They would say, well, I can't be certain that I actually exist. And it's a really strange interaction to have with people that are, on that much of a skeptic. So talk to us a little bit. You had mentioned, Nietzsche. We mentioned Descartes. Talk to us a little bit about how Immanuel Kant plays into this. One of someone that you've studied a lot. How does Kant kind of get the ball rolling, unbeknownst to him, with this whole postmodern deal? Well, Kant's living during this modern era, and he sees these rationalists, all around, really putting such an emphasis on the mind. And there's some things that couldn't make sense to the rationalists, like miracles. You have David Hume, who's a total skeptic, and, he comes against miracles. But you've got these rationalists, right? Hume's an empiricist, by the way, but you've got these rationalists that are literally kind of growing in their resistance against the church. Now, Kant is a believer. He's a Christian, and he is struggling because he's looking, he goes, man, if the rationalists keep doing what they're doing, they're going to make arguments that are going to be so strong that it's going to destroy the church. So Kant basically offers his set of thinking, and he talks about these two different realms, the noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm. The noumenal realm, he says, we don't have access to. The noumenal realm is the realm where you would encounter a thing in itself, the real objective world that we cannot know in and of itself. What he said is we know the phenomenal world, the world as it is represented to us, the world as it appears to us. And so he used his reason, obviously, so that's why sometimes he's considered a rationalist. Well, he rationalizes not about the noumenal realm, the realm where something is in and of itself. We can't access that, but he accesses that. He rationalizes about the phenomenal realm. And so in doing so, he feels as though he has safeguarded Christianity against the rationalists of his day. In other words, these rationalists who so thought they could rationalize about the objective world, the noumenal realm, the world as it is, he cuts it off from them by saying they can't access the noumenal realm. They can't know the objective world in and of itself. And so now all is fair game.
Yeah.
So they can go ahead and do what they do, but it's about the phenomenal realm. And if that's the case, then guess what? Believers are free to believe as well, because they can't, rationally disprove that God exists through reason. So he meant this from a good motive, but then later what would happen is people would pick up that subjectivity, so to speak, that the subject can't encounter the objective world, and then others would take it farther, like George Berkeley, Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche, Wittgenstein. You would have these different philosophers who would take this kind of thinking and deconstruct it, and this would become really hard, because now can you even access the objective world? Can you even know a thing in itself?
Yeah. So postmodernism as a philosophy, as kind of just a general way to look at the world, really it infects all areas. It infects art, it infects politics and economics, and religion, and understanding how we interact with the world. So you've mentioned philosophers like Nietzsche, and we talked about Foucault and Derrida a little bit, kind of some of this French influence. Maybe try to wrap up as best you can. Again, this is very difficult because it's kind of a moving target. Some of the kind of core tenets or beliefs of postmodernism as you see it.
So basically, it's a reaction to modernism. So it's a deconstructing methodology. So as Nietzsche felt like you had the religious class, and the reason that you had the priests is it was their way to control society. So morals was the way you controlled the herd. And so we need to cast that off, and we need to have a will to power, and we need to discover our own purpose and shape our own destiny, so to speak. And then you would have people like Foucault and Derrida, and Derrida would start deconstructing language and say, you can never know what an interpretation really is. It is whatever you want it to be. And so this whole deconstruction idea becomes important. But what they start doing is the postmodernists have attached their philosophical system. You can't know truth, morals are relative, but they've attached their system to cultural Marxism. And in Marxism, you had the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So you had the oppressed and the oppressors. And Marx and Engels in their Communist Manifesto ultimately believed that the working class would overthrow the capitalists. Well, they've taken that same interpretive grid and they've applied it throughout all kinds of different fields of study. And now you've got critical theory, like critical race theory, where people are looking for what? We're oppressors and the oppressed, and they're seeking to overthrow it all. So some of the characteristics of the postmodern mindset is this, and I write, is they are anti-rationalists, anti-realists, anti-objectivity, anti-universals, anti-modernity, anti-power structures, except their own, of course, anti-individual, anti-capitalism, moral relativists, and absolutely committed to obliterating any vestiges of reason left over from the Age of Enlightenment that dominated the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe. With the rhetorical savvy of the ancient Greek sophists, these cultural warriors have drunk from the fountain of Machiavelli and will say whatever or do whatever it takes to eliminate and erect their new world order. The message is clear: comply or be canceled. And this is basically postmodernism today. Interestingly enough, they say that, there is no such thing as objective truth, but boy, don't they seem absolute in their truth that they hold to overthrow anything that rings of oppression in order to reign in their power seat with their worldview of postmodern deconstructionism.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. So again, that's a brief summary. We've done episodes on critical race theory where we expand some of this a little bit more. But I want to pick up on something you said there where you talked about the idea of kind of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and that has kind of transferred itself into kind of the oppressed and the oppressor class. And I see this coming at the church a lot. Those of us that are Christians, we have this objective moral view of reality, and people are coming to us and saying things like, well, you don't want to be an oppressor, do you? And again, the answer from us would be like, well, no, we don't want oppression. We don't want people to be oppressed. And then so then the next step is, well, then you have to adopt this kind of worldview of being a not oppressor, or you don't want to be racist. You have to be an anti-racist. And so we're looking at kind of other modern thinkers. So in our few remaining minutes here, Bobby, give us just how the church can maybe reach those with this sort of postmodern mindset.
I think it's important that the church does not stay silent. First off, the language "we're spiraling into silence" has been used before. We are living in a very challenging time, and we need to speak up. Everybody's out of the closet except the church, and so we need to speak up. But the culture has been very strategic in its ways to keep us silent. So, you don't want to be a Christian nationalist, do you? Well, why do they say that? Because they want the power. And if you vote your values, guess what? They're not going to have their voice. So you get accused of what? Being a Christian nationalist just because you want to vote your values. Can there be such a thing as Christian nationalism? Sure. In an unhealthy way? Sure. But there's nothing wrong with caring about your nation as a Christian and voting your values. But they'll do that to you. They'll love shame you. Like you either agree with the LGBTQ movement or you don't love them. And so they'll use love against you. And we need to be aware of how the evil one is working. So we're getting silenced by calling Christian nationalists so we don't vote. We're being silenced by being love shamed because we don't agree with the homosexual movement. So we end up agreeing with them to show them that we love them. And these are mistakes that we ought not make. We need to hold fast to the word of God and be faithful. And so it's important as we engage the culture that we're living in, that we speak up, that we let our voice be heard. And if we're going to reach people in this postmodern mindset, we need to start with the consequences. You go out and talk to people about their sin, they don't even think they're sinning. The government's legalized these things that the church calls sin. They're going to say, what's sin? But then we need to ask them, okay, if all of these things that were once called sin, right, are now goods, like, living out however you want to live, drugs, debauchery, immorality, sex change, sexual immorality, ask, how's that working for you? And what you'll find is there's consequences to their lifestyle. And so work backwards from the consequences to show them that these can't be goods because they're creating consequences. You've been fed a wrong worldview and it's creating consequences in your life. Mind if I share the truth with you? That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And again, we are just scratching the surface on some of these things. So if there is a particular point that you want us to dive deeper on in a future episode, please let us know in the comments under this video on our YouTube channel. And again, we could talk a ton about this, but Bobby, any final thoughts or closing words you want to leave our audience with?
No, I just really hope that people will keep their eyes open and be aware and learn what's going on today.
Yeah, excellent words. Again, I'll just reiterate, there is a lot here, and we aren't able to kind of go into the depth that we would love in a single episode, but that's why we have over 100 episodes of the Unapologetic Show, and we'll continue to bring you these truths and make the case for Christianity to a doubting world. So with that, we will meet you next time on the Unapologetic Show.